What's going on, Los Angeles, Bruin Nation, LAFB fam? How we doing? The Madman here with all of your UCLA football needs. And so excited to be here early week to talk all things Bruins football. And we're going to have Wayne and Will on later this week to talk about the Northwestern preview and what the road ahead is for the season as we embark on the final 9 games and really use this as a development journey going into 2026. But I really wanted to center the conversation today around a lot of the national conversation that you may all have noticed over the last 4 or 5 days about UCLA football at a macro level. And whether that was articles from the LA Times with Ben Bolch, or articles from The Athletic with Bruce Feldman, or Yahoo Sports, or even national podcasts with the like of Colin Cowherd and Josh Pate, very reputable, decorated sources at a national level, have had a conversation that's been very similar in nature. And most notably, what is success look like for UCLA football moving forward? Is being the head coach of UCLA football a great job? And where do we really go from here as a program? It's been very interesting because the Josh Pate, Colin Cowherd conversation around, hey, is UCLA a great football job moving forward? And some of their sources have indicated that folks that are even at high-level coordinator positions in top 15, top 20, top 25 programs would rather stay where they are than take the UCLA football job. They've sort of indicated level of investment, level of priority being a concern. We talk about, Colin Cowherd mentioned, just as a comparative data point, USC across town is spending between $16 million and $18 million on NIL this year. And if you look at their defensive line, look a lot better because they've bought a lot of talent. When you talk about a reference in Ben Bolch's article, he specifically alluded to that 2023 Victory Bell game when the Bruins went into the Coliseum and beat the Trojans led by Caleb Williams, that the cost of UCLA's roster was $400,000 and the cost of USC's roster was about 30 times that, which is $12 million. And so it's been a fascinating conversation around what UCLA football has been, is, and what it can be. And I'm very excited that this conversation is taking place at a national level. I had the opportunity to ask Martin Jarman a very similar question when he took the job 6 years ago, and there was a small gathering of alumni to meet with him. And I asked Martin at that particular time, what is the definition of success here? What does success look like for UCLA football, and what is your vision moving forward? And so the fact that we're having these conversations at such a national level, I think is very important. Now, having said that, I think it's very critical that folks such as myself, such as Will, such as Wayne, such as Ben Bolch, Bruin Report Online, the folks that follow this team on a day-to-day basis, they understand the intricacies and nuances of this university, of this program, and its players weigh in on this conversation. Because I think sometimes what happens is you can take national arguments and they are oftentimes predicated on stereotypes that maybe are adopted year over year based on perception that maybe existed 5, 10, 15 years ago. And I love Colin Cowherd, huge fan of his, huge fan of Josh Pate, huge fan of all of the Yahoo and Athletic folks that have commented here. But I wanted to provide my take on trying to integrate this conversation for you, for us, and really continue this conversation as we move forward. And I want to start with comparing the situation at UCLA with the situation at USC. And the reason I'm starting there is Colin Cowherd alluded to USC in particular. Ben Bolch's article alluded to USC in particular. And so there just seems to be a national gravitation with the crosstown rivalry. Anytime you talk USC, you want to talk UCLA by comparison. Anytime you talk UCLA, you want to talk USC by comparison. And I think the myth that we need to dispel a little bit is the fact that USC has all of this money to spend on football and UCLA has no money to spend on football. And the fact that USC has access to just deeper pockets and more zeros in bank accounts than does UCLA. And quite frankly, the data just simply doesn't hold in that regard. And I want to provide a couple of metrics here. The first is university endowment. And when you look at the university endowment of UCLA and USC, it may be surprising to some, but as of the end of 2024, and this is all publicly available information, the endowment of UCLA is about $9.5 billion. The endowment for USC at the end of 2024 is $8.2 billion. So ironically, UCLA has a slightly higher endowment than USC. When you factor in endowment dollar per student, because oftentimes that becomes the metric to determine wealth of a university, perhaps even wealth of university's alumni, access to resources, access to investment. UCLA has 48,000 students and USC has 47,000 students. And so a very comparable endowment per student number, which a lot of people may not believe, because there may be a perception that USC's endowment is just significantly higher than UCLA's. Now, I'm not suggesting endowment being greater means a school is better than the other or anything like that, nor am I suggesting that access to that money is very easy to be able to get and transfer over to athletics. Hardly, not at all the case. But the endowment is an interesting metric in the following way. It's an indicator of how well a university can fundraise and invest around a focused set of priorities. And so if you give a university a focused set of priorities and objectives, how well can they fundraise money? And then how well can they invest the fundraising of that money to grow the pot even further? And the reality is USC and UCLA are very comparable in that regard, with UCLA actually a little bit higher. The second metric to really look at is the number of ultra high net worth individuals that are alumni of each of these schools. And the ultra high net worth individual, by definition, is the individual that has assets greater than $30 million, assets and a net worth greater than $30 million. And so when you think about that particular metric, that really is the backbone of your boosters for a football program. It is very rare that you will have a billionaire bankroll a program, which is why Oregon is so unique, so one of one in the entire college football and college athletics landscape, because you have the founder of Nike, who is an Oregon alum, whose whole and sole priority as a billionaire, as one of the richest people on planet Earth, is to promote, enhance, and really cultivate Oregon sports. And the reality of the situation is billionaires in general have a wide set of diverse investments, diverse interests, and want to put their monies in very different places on very different timelines, on their whim, on their terms. And so the true backbone of football boosters and the health of a football program is really your ultra high net worth individuals. Because just simple math there. If you take 30 million and you get a 5% return on that money in the bank in a very kind of low risk environment, that's $1.5 million. And that passive income, by and large, is not the only source of income for those individuals. So you're talking about individuals in general that are making between $2, $3, $4 million a year. And so for those individuals to be able to cut a $500,000 check to football is not that big a deal. That is the backbone by which you want to build your war chest, quote unquote, for a football program. Because if you can get 30 ultra high net worth individuals to give $500,000 each, that's $15 million a year for your football program. And so when we think about the number of ultra high net worth individuals, USC has 3,900 alumni that have a net worth greater than 30 million. UCLA has 3,000 alumni that have a net worth greater than 30 million. So one is 3,900, the other is 3,000. USC is slightly higher, but again, both very comparable numbers. By comparison, if you take a university like Harvard, we talked about endowments being 8 and 9 billion respectively. Harvard's endowment is $50 billion. The number of ultra high net worth individuals at Harvard are 18,000. And so there's certain schools that just have a much greater capacity, a much greater socioeconomic status than others. But that's not really the case here. And then when you round it out and you look at the number of alumni that each school has approximately 500,000 alumni that are scattered all over the world with equal access to media, to entertainment, to finance, to real estate, and access to a great amount of networks, people, industries, and so forth. So when you look at the landscape of USC's alumni and UCLA's alumni, these are very similar socioeconomic demographics. And so the level of capacity that USC has to tap into is very similar to the level of capacity that UCLA has to tap into. And so this is not about capacity. We're not comparing Yale to Fresno State in terms of ability to generate resources. We're comparing two extremely similar alumni groups. And so the amount of money that UCLA can get for football, in theory, is very similar, if not identical, to the amount of money that USC can get for football. So this is not a capacity issue. This is a priority issue. And it's very clear that USC is prioritizing football in a way that UCLA is not. And even in this particular landscape, for better or for worse, we see all of the challenges in higher education today, university budgets being slashed, so many things going on at the macroeconomic level that we won't discuss on this podcast. But despite all of that, despite layoffs, despite budget cuts, despite tightening of resources, you see USC going out there and fundraising for a $200+ million football center. You see USC going out there and really accruing a budget, as Colin Cowherd talked about, from 16 to 18 million. And so what does UCLA need to do to prioritize football moving forward? And I think it really comes down to an alignment between administration and alumni. And this is a very unique opportunity in UCLA football history because we have a new chancellor, we have a new leadership that's in place over the course of this year. Where does Chancellor Frank want to take football? And he has so much on his plate. There is so much going on within the landscape of UCLA. He is such a decorated leader. He is such a visionary. I couldn't be more proud as an alum to have Chancellor Julio Frank leading us. And the question now is going to be, how much does Chancellor Frank want to prioritize football as part of his aspirations? Let's not forget, Gene Block was UCLA's chancellor for 15 years. Chancellor Julio Frank has been chancellor for presumably 6, 7, 8 years. He's taken the job at the age of 72. And so usually a university president, a university chancellor that has a very long 15-year run probably will take the job around when he or she are in their 60s and kind of go mid to late 70s. Chancellor Julio Frank coming in at 72, that's a shorter runway. He's looking at 5, 6, 7 years. So it's going to be a very focused set of priorities that he's going to be working towards. And the question is going to be, is football one of those 3 or 4 or 5 priorities that he's really going to be dialed in and focused on over the next 6 or 7 years? And if it is, I think there's an opportunity here for him to prioritize football in a very tactical way. And I think the first thing that he needs to look at is the licensing and trademarking model of UCLA athletics merchandise. And right now, the revenue that is generated from jerseys and from track pants and from polos and everything that is associated with the UCLA athletics brand is right now shared across multiple campus entities and governed by a group known as ASUCLA. And this is a phenomenal construct and model that was created when the California Higher Education Master Plan was invoked in the early part of the 20th century. But nowhere was in that plan anticipated how much of a business universities would ultimately become, and B, how big college sports would be as a business and industry on its own. And so the first thing that I think Chancellor Frank would need to do is really relook at that model and disaggregate that model and provide that licensing revenue directly to UCLA athletics. And so you're talking about a number there that's $5 to $10 million a year. And rather than that being peanut buttered across various campus entities in a shared governance model, which is altruistic, it makes sense conceptually, it just doesn't align with the day-to-day realities of the college sports landscape today. And one way to prioritize football and sports is to really say, we're going to break up this model and really go directly, get that pot directly to athletics. Number two, Chancellor Frank, I think, has the opportunity to really revisit the whole Calamoni situation. And UCLA is on the hook for $10 million a year to give to Cal from now until 2027. And that was a vote by the UC Regents. And the vote indicated that UCLA needed to do this in the spirit of preserving competitiveness from an athletic standpoint for both of their flagship universities. But I have to say, the regential body does not have legal oversight over what UCLA can do with their athletics budget. And so while the vote is a data point, while the vote is respected, while the vote is appreciated, it actually can't be legally enforced. And so UCLA administration has an opportunity to call that vote on its bluff and say, what happens if we don't pay Cal $10 million a year? And I promise you, nothing. Because nowhere in the regential ecosystem would there ever be a scenario where a recommendation would be made for one UC school to sue another UC school. It just would not happen. The political optics just don't work that particular way. And so I think there's an opportunity for Chancellor Frank to revisit the Calamoni and say, while that vote is acknowledged and appreciated, I am the chancellor of UCLA. I have to think about UCLA in its best interest. And frankly, this isn't legally enforceable by any sort of law or antitrust situation or anything associated with the creation of a business enterprise. And so I would really lean in to how UCLA can get that money back. If you just look at the Calamoni and you just look at the ACE-UCLA piece, the Calamoni is $10 million a year. The licensing piece is $5 to $10 million a year. That's $15 to $20 million a year. And if you're going to invest 75% of an athletic department's revenue into football, you're talking about 12 to 15 million right there that UCLA would get for their football program without having to make a single phone call to a donor and move forward. And so that's a serious infusion of cash for this program that can really revive competitiveness from a coaching staff perspective and who you can attain, from a recruiting perspective, from NIL, and so on and so forth. And so the third thing I would look at, those first two things are very tactical, is how do you sell the vision? How do you sell the vision of what UCLA can be in football before it has actually happened? And the beauty of this is that there have been examples in the last few years in college football that have been very clear. Think about what happened to Colorado with Deion Sanders, Coach Prime arriving to Colorado. It's a famous story where the athletic director knew he didn't have the funds to hire Deion, went to Colorado's president and says, if you admit this, if you allow this to happen, if you let me hire Deion at the tune of 5 years for $29 million, I don't have the money right now. I promise you, if we make this hire, our fundraising is going to go through the roof and we're going to be able to cover the nut on this investment. And the president believed in the athletic director at the time, and lo and behold, it happened. Now, Colorado, the jury is out on the field football success, but there can be no denying the success that Coach Prime has had off the field. The valuation of Colorado football over the last 3 or 4 years has absolutely skyrocketed and gone through the roof. The amount of revenue that the athletic department is generating over the last 3 or 4 years is significantly greater than what they had in the 10, 15, 20, 25 years prior. And, oh, by the way, they were able to accrue a Heisman Trophy winner last year to bring even more notoriety to the program. So Colorado is a salient example of a program that wasn't doing well for 20 years, but an AD and a university president were able to sell a vision before it became a reality. Another great example is SMU. Just think about the journey that Southern Methodist University has been on from the mid-1980s up until last year. This is a program, let's not forget, that literally was incurred with the death penalty, where they were not allowed to play football for a period of time in the late 1980s, early 1990s, because of sanctions and because of wrongdoings in the earlier part of the 1980s. And from there to being in the college football playoff last year is absolutely staggering. SMU had a handful of winning seasons over the last 30 years. And in this new NIL world, the president, the athletic director went to those old boosters and said, it's been so long. This program is so dusty and so archaic at the moment. We believe we can get it back. We're not there yet. We need you to imagine. We need you to believe. But if you do, will you pony up and invest? And that's exactly what they did. And SMU was in the college football playoff last year. And I think with every intention of being a perennial ACC contender. Let's not forget, SMU came to the ACC late. They are not a full card-carrying member of the ACC from a financial standpoint. The allocations that they're getting from media rights with the ACC is less than the likes of Miami and Florida State and Clemson. They have their boosters covering that in addition to providing more in NIL. Think about that and how powerful that is for a program that was on the death penalty and completely irrelevant for the better part of 30 years. And I think there's an opportunity here now for Chancellor Julio Frank to take some of those examples and share with the alumni community, share with the booster community what his vision for UCLA football is, and also tie it into a larger vision for the university's enhancement over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. The last example I'll provide is that of Alabama. Think about the economic impact that Nick Saban has had on the University of Alabama. It was reported that between admissions and endowment, the amount of revenue that was generated into Alabama at the time Nick Saban retired, from the time he got there in 2007, was over $1 billion. Nick Saban had a $1 billion impact on the valuation of the University of Alabama over his tenure. And so there is a direct correlation between the excitement that you can generate on a football field and in a football program and how the bottom line works with a particular university and how that university is perceived in academic settings as well as socially. And so do I believe that UCLA can be back? Absolutely. Will, myself, Wayne, we wouldn't bleed UCLA if we didn't. And we have every desire and expectation that UCLA is going to be back. This is a top 20 job in all of college football when you talk about campus, when you talk about academics, when you talk about the LA market, when you talk about access to the alumni network, as long as administration is all bought in and prioritizes football the way some of the SEC powers do, the way some of the Midwestern powers do, the way USC does. And if they do that, this is absolutely a great job indeed. So, folks, let me know what you think. It's a charged conversation for sure. I have full faith in Chancellor Julio Frank to take a page out of Chancellor Charles Young's book. Let's not forget, Charles Young, great chancellor from the 1970s to the late 1990s. He saw the value of UCLA athletics and particularly football. It is not a coincidence that UCLA football's peak in the 1980s and the 1990s was directly coincided with not just Terry Donahue, but Chancellor Charles Young's leadership. And it's also not a coincidence that UCLA's last great season in football was 1998, and Chancellor Charles Young's last season as chancellor was 1997. So the leadership really matters here. We've got a great one in Chancellor Frank. Now let's see if he prioritizes football to reach its absolute zenith. Because if he does, this is no question a sleeping giant that once again will rise and hopefully rise to levels that we have yet seen happen over the last 50 years. And so, Bruins, hit that like and subscribe button. Now more than ever, as we talked about, we need you. We need this community to come together as we grow into a new era of UCLA football. Will and I are so passionate about this and care so deeply about the beautiful community we've built. And so it means the absolute world to us to hit that like and subscribe button. And before I sign off, we got to pay the bills around here with the Sleeper app, as you see on the banner below. Here's a little secret. The Sleeper app is more than just a platform for season-long fantasy leagues. This year, millions of users enjoyed playing fantasy sports on Sleeper, but the app offers so much more. Live stats, real-time updates, and visualization on all stats, news feed, get lightning-fast updates on your favorite players and teams, and a real-time chat. Engage with other users about individual plays and performances during the NFL and NBA seasons. Download the #1 sports app today and experience it for yourself. Hit that promo code UCLA LAFB and you get $100 match on the first $100 that you bet with. So, folks, I'm going to sign off here. We'll be back together in a couple of days. Let me know what you think about this great debate that's going on nationally with UCLA football. And as always, be loud, be proud, be passionate Bruins. And as always, fours up forever.